It was a brisk autumn morning in the bustling city. Claire Bennett, a wealthy businesswoman known for her elegance and success, stepped out of her luxury car. She was dressed in a tailored coat, her heels clicking confidently on the pavement as she headed toward a high-end cafe for her morning coffee. Claire had worked hard to build her empire and prided herself on her independence. To her, people got what they deserved, based on their effort. She often brushed off the growing number of homeless people in her city as someone else's problem. But today, as she approached the cafe door, she noticed a teenage boy sitting on the sidewalk. His clothes were tattered, his hair unkempt, and his eyes hollow with exhaustion. He couldn't have been more than 16. In front of him was a cardboard sign. Hungry. Cold. Please help. The boy glanced up at Claire with a mixture of hope and desperation. "Ma'am, could you spare some change or anything to eat?" he asked softly. Claire's polished face tightened into a frown. She clutched her designer handbag closer and shook her head curtly. "Sorry, I don't carry cash." Her tone was clipped, dismissive. She stepped around him, careful not to let her heels touch the edge of his blanket. The boy's face fell, but he didn't say another word as she disappeared into the cafe. Inside, Claire couldn't shake the image of the boy's tired eyes. She sipped her latte, irritated at herself for even thinking about it. "He's probably just trying to scam people," she muttered under her breath. "Kids like that should figure out how to help themselves." That evening, Claire found herself at one of the city's most exclusive charity galas. The grand ballroom of the Sterling Hotel was adorned with glittering chandeliers and lavish floral arrangements. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits sipped champagne and exchanged stories of their latest ventures and vacations. Claire fit right in, her confidence radiating as she made her way through the crowd. She paused for photos with a few notable figures, her smile practiced and perfect. Conversations revolved around philanthropy and success, topics Claire excelled at navigating. To the outside world, she was the epitome of accomplishment, poised, charitable, and untouchable. As the evening progressed, Claire accepted compliments with grace, signed a sizable check for the charity, and made sure to leave at just the right moment to maintain an air of mystery. She prided herself on her timing. The air outside was crisp as she stepped onto the quiet street, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. The gala had been a success, and she felt a sense of satisfaction. But as she approached her car, parked a short distance away, a faint noise stopped her in her tracks. From a nearby alleyway, she heard the sound of rustling. Her first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of her. She turned her head and peered into the dimly lit alley. There he was, the boy from earlier that day. His frail frame was bent over a trash bin, his hands trembling as he pulled out what looked like a discarded sandwich. The sight was jarring against the backdrop of the elegant gala she had just left. For a moment, Claire froze. She watched as the boy cautiously inspected the food before taking a small bite, his face a mixture of desperation and shame. A pang of unease gripped her chest, though she quickly pushed it aside. "Not my problem," she muttered under her breath, turning away. Her steps quickened as she headed to her car, her polished heels striking the pavement in rhythm. But as she drove home, the image of the boy lingered in her mind. She turned on the radio, trying to drown out her thoughts, but the music didn't help. His face, his hollow eyes, and the way his shoulders hunched against the cold wouldn't leave her alone. Claire shook her head, gripping the steering wheel tighter. There are so many homeless kids out there, she told herself. Why should this one be any different? Yet deep down, something about him felt different. Something about his face stirred a faint, unsettling familiarity that she couldn't quite place. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the mansion's grand exterior bathed in soft lights, Claire still couldn't shake the boy from her thoughts. She tried to convince herself it was just an odd coincidence. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, a tiny voice inside her whispered that perhaps it wasn't. The next morning began like any other for Claire. Her office buzzed with efficiency. Phones ringing, emails pinging, and her team moving with the precision she demanded. Claire thrived in this environment, her mind sharp as she reviewed contracts and made decisions that shaped her empire. Midway through her day, she was deep in conversation with a senior executive when a knock interrupted her. Claire looked up, mildly annoyed. Yes, her assistant peeked in, looking hesitant. Ms. Bennett, there's a young man here asking to see you. He says it's urgent. Claire frowned, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. I don't take unscheduled meetings. Tell him to email my office and book an appointment. The assistant lingered, clearly uncomfortable. He was very insistent, ma'am. He says his name is Ethan. And, she hesitated, lowering her voice, he says he's your son. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt off its axis. The pen in Claire's hand slipped through her fingers, landing softly on the desk. She stared at her assistant, trying to process the words. My son? Claire repeated, her voice almost a whisper. Her assistant nodded. Should I ask him to leave? Claire's mind raced, her heart pounding against her ribs. Ethan. The name brought back a tidal wave of memories she had spent years suppressing. Slowly, she shook her head. No. Send him in. The seconds stretched like hours as Claire waited, her palms damp against the sleek surface of her desk. When the door finally opened, her breath caught in her throat. It was him. The boy from the cafe. The boy from the alley. He stood in the doorway, his frame thin but his posture upright, as if he were trying to muster all the courage he had. His clothes were the same, still worn and shabby, but his eyes, those eyes, were filled with a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. Ethan? Claire whispered, her voice barely audible. Yes, he said, his voice steady despite the slight tremble in his hands. It's me, your son. Claire felt as though the air had been knocked out of her. Memories she had buried for decades came rushing back. She was 19 again, scared and alone. She saw herself holding a tiny baby, her hands trembling as she signed the adoption papers, convincing herself it was the right thing to do. I don't understand, she said, her voice shaky. How did you find me? Ethan took a hesitant step forward. It wasn't easy. I've been looking for a while. When I saw you yesterday, I knew I had to try. Claire's chest tightened, emotions swirling in a storm of shock, guilt, and disbelief. She stared at the boy in front of her, the boy she had walked past, dismissed, and ignored, not knowing he was her own flesh and blood. Why now? She managed to ask. Ethan hesitated, his eyes darting to the floor before meeting hers again. Because I didn't have anywhere else to go. The family that adopted me, they're gone. I ended up in foster care. And then, I was on my own. Claire's heart broke as the words sank in. She had spent years building her life, believing she had left her past behind. But now the past was standing right in front of her, unraveling everything she thought she knew. I didn't know, she stammered, tears threatening to spill. I thought you were with a good family. I thought you'd have everything I couldn't give you. Ethan's face softened, but there was still a trace of hurt in his expression. I'm not here to blame you, he said quietly. I just wanted you to know I exist. Claire's vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. For years, she had locked away the pain of that decision, convincing herself it was for the best. But now, seeing Ethan, hearing his voice, she realized how much she had lost. Ethan, she whispered again, her voice trembling with emotion. I'm so sorry. Ethan didn't respond, but the faintest glimmer of hope flickered in his eyes. For both of them, this was the beginning of a conversation they had avoided for far too long, a conversation that would change their lives forever. I didn't know how else to find you, Ethan began. The family that adopted me, they were great at first, but things fell apart after my adoptive mom passed away. I ended up in foster care, and it wasn't easy. When I turned 16, I ran away. I've been on the streets ever since. Claire's throat tightened. Why didn't you contact me sooner? She stammered. Ethan's expression hardened. I didn't think you'd care. But then I found out who you were. I looked you up, and I saw your picture. You've got everything, money, success. I just thought maybe you'd help me, just this once. The weight of his words crushed her. She had built her life on the idea of moving forward, leaving the past behind. But here was her past, standing right in front of her, broken and in need. I didn't know, Claire began, her voice trembling. I didn't know you were struggling. You didn't care to know, Ethan said, his voice breaking. I'm your son, and you walked right past me like I was nothing. Tears welled up in Claire's eyes. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I made so many mistakes, but I want to fix this. Please let me help you now. That moment marked a turning point for Claire. She immediately arranged for Ethan to stay in a safe place, providing him with food, clothes, and medical care. But more than that, she spent time with him, listening to his story and slowly rebuilding the bridge she had burned years ago. Ethan was hesitant at first, but over time he began to trust her. Claire, in turn, learned to let go of her cold exterior and embrace the vulnerability that came with being a mother. She realized that success wasn't measured by wealth or status, but by the love and connections we build with others. Helping Ethan wasn't just about giving him a better life, it was about rediscovering her humanity. Months later, at a family dinner, Ethan looked at Claire with a small smile. "Thanks, Mom," he said quietly. The word mom hit Claire like a warm embrace. She had almost lost the chance to be his mother, but now she was determined to never let him go again. This story reminds us that everyone has a story, and sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who need us the most. It's never too late to right a wrong, reconnect, or show kindness to someone in need. If this story moved you, please like, share, and comment below with your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories that inspire and remind us of the power of love and second chances. Thank you for watching.